This podcast is made possible in part through a partnership with TrueFire. TrueFire is the most comprehensive guitar learning experience on the internet, with over 51,000 guitar lessons from the best educators in the world. It makes TrueFire the #1 most trusted music education resource for guitar players. We as guitar players sometimes get fixated on the gear that we play, and we neglect the skill level that we play. And many of us have a hard time finding instructors locally. TrueFire bridges that gap. You can find my affiliate link below to get 40% off with my code 40watt of your first purchase through TrueFire. Learn, practice, play, TrueFire. This podcast is made possible by the support of many wonderful people over on Patreon. If you would like to support this show and help make sure it keeps going, you can go over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, where for as little as $3 a month, you can help make sure this show keeps happening. Thank you for all of your support. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 40 Watt Podcast. I'm so excited. I'm your host, Philip Carter. Joey, I realized a couple of weeks ago that I never say my name on this podcast. I never say my name. I'm going to start saying, I'm your host, Philip Carter, so you know who I am, so that if you see me commenting in Facebook groups and whatnot, you know who the heck this is.
Yeah.
We're going to get some housekeeping out of the way real quick, because I'm really excited about this episode. Listeners, thank you for all your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe icon and the bell thing. If you're listening, whatever your podcast player's version of subscribe, follow, whatever it is, please do that. Please rate and review. Do all those things. It's totally free and it helps this podcast. If you want to do a little more, you can always go over, like the intro said, to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, and you can help keep this show going. And if you support the show, I will read your name at the end of the episode, like I read all of my Patreon supporters at the end of this episode. So,
come on.
Right? I mean, you get your name heard by dozens, okay, it's actually hundreds, but hundreds of people every week. It's wonderful. So,
come on.
Yeah, in fact, I am a Patreon supporter of the Brothers Landreth, which you can find the link for their Patreon below as well. And Patreon's great. Actually, it's the only album credits I have to my name now.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So we're going to talk about that here in a second, but first, Joey, my guest today, y'all, is Joey Landreth of the Bros Landreth, or the Brothers Landreth, and of course, Joey Landreth solo project. How are you, sir?
I am fantastic. I'm getting over a bit of a sinus infection, which is a bummer, but other than that,
oh yeah,
great.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right into this, though. You are literally coming off a couple of days ago a Juno Award for Best Contemporary Roots Album.
That's right. Yeah, we were over in Edmonton over the weekend, and we were nominated. Dave and I, we kind of had, like, when we found out that we were nominated, we sat down and we're like, I feel like this is not our year for this. Mm-hmm. Not because we didn't think the record was good, or not because, like, down with the industry, just like it just didn't feel like it was our year. So we really prepared ourselves to watch somebody else walk away with it, and the category was stacked with, funny story, a band called Fortunate Ones, who I was on tour with, opening up for them. I was opening up for them solo back in, I really should remember this, 2018.
Yeah.
And so I had never done any East Coast Canada touring before. So like the furthest east we really ever get is Montreal.
Okay.
And like Eastern Canada from Western Canada is pretty hard to get to. It's just such a massive country, and it's not like the States where there's like a major center every 3 or 4 hours. It's like,
right.
You play Montreal and then you've got like a 10-hour drive to the next town. Like for us from Winnipeg, our next main market that we play is Saskatoon, and that's like an 8-hour drive northwest.
Wow.
So it's, anyway, all that to say, I was out on tour opening for those guys, and that was the weekend, or that was the trip that my wife and I decided to elope, and we got married while we were on tour. And so Fortunate Ones, Andrew and Kat, were our only attendees at our wedding. They were our witnesses, and they also kitted out their Dodge Grand Caravan to be like a a wedding chariot to drive us to this little tiny town where we got married. It's just beautiful. So the category was stacked with people that we love and adore and admire. And so we was just like, I was really excited to watch one of our friends win. And when they said our name, it was like, I obviously I'm so pumped, but I was a little like, oh damn it, I really wanted to watch like, the East Pointers win, or I wanted to
Yeah.
watch the Fortunate Ones win, which, it might sound ridiculous, but you just cheer your friends on. But anyway, all that to say, we're thrilled, and the we won the award for our most recent record, which is an album that Dave, my brother, and I, it means a lot to us. We put a lot into this record, a lot of heart and soul. I mean, you always put a lot into what you're doing, but this record was extra special. We made it during the pandemic, and it was just he and I and our producer Murray in this room, you know, working on the record. I was waiting for Joni to be born. It was just it's just an incredibly meaningful work for us, and so to get an award for it is just really special. Anyway, all that
Yeah.
to say, pretty
Well,
cool.
it was pretty fun. I was able to actually watch the ceremony live on I was able to watch it on YouTube because it was broadcast. And then
Yeah,
it was really great because so before y'all accepted the award, Dave, for those of you who don't know, David, the bassist and the other brother in Bros Landreth, actually sent a video to the Discord for your Patreon supporters of y'all sitting at the table, like showing that y'all were there because somebody had shared the link in there. And it was just a fun little experience. And then after this weekend, I actually spent the weekend listening to all those other nominees. And you're right, that
yeah,
was an absolutely stacked category. All of those bands and groups are incredible.
yeah.
So I got to discover some really cool new music through the
Oh man,
process.
thank you for going to do that, because that category is really, really, in terms of Canadian roots music,
Mhm.
contemporary roots music, like that's the creme de la creme for Canadian roots. And so it's really cool of you to check that out. And we're doing good stuff up here,
Yeah.
like not just us, but sort of Canadian roots music. And I'm very proud of everybody doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's my genre. That's my vibe. I most listeners to the show know I'm a blues guy, and but I'm also an Americana guy. Like because I'm in Mississippi, down where like it all kind of mixed together and became. We got everything from Robert Johnson to Elvis Presley coming out of here, and so
Yeah.
really get into all of that roots music, which I typically just think of as Mississippi music in general. So it was really great. Of course, great to see y'all win. Coming off the back of, by now y'all have talked about it ad nauseum. Uh, your song "Made Up Mind," the Bonnie Raitt cover of your "Made Up Mind," which is so fun to say, isn't it? Although I
Yeah.
did watch live footage of y'all playing in Minneapolis, where you jokingly said after playing the song that was a Bonnie Raitt cover. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was great. It won a Grammy for best. Oh, I got to get this right. Best Americana performance. I think
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. Look at that. Look at that memory. Who says I'm getting old? I do. I say I'm getting old. Um, so there's so many things we can talk about, and I've been really fortunate to be able to get to know you over the years, and we text back and forth every now and again when you have time because you're wildly busy. You don't know how to stop.
I
Um,
don't.
and so this is where I'm going to disappoint some of the guitar playing followers of this podcast. I am not going to ask you your tuning. I'm not going to ask you your string gauge. I'm not going to ask you any of those questions. I'm not going to ask you to detail the obscene pedal board you toured with the last tour. There's a video that if people want to, they can go check that out. There's other things. So I asked in my Discord, and normally I save Patreon questions and Discord questions for the end, but someone asked the question I really wanted to get into, and I'm really interested in your process as a songwriter. I want to understand because you actually said during that same show, that Minneapolis show, this is a great quote. I love this quote. You said that I really love having songs. I really hate writing songs. So is it like a really tough process for you in songwriting process?
It has been. It's funny. I'm trying to reframe that narrative for myself. I I think part like, it's not that I hate songwriting and I feel like, it's cute to say that, and people laugh at it,
Right.
when especially, I don't know. It's a weird thing for me, because I think part of it is that, because I'm an instrumentalist first, I spent the first 10 or 15 years of my career like being really, really focused on not necessarily being the best guitar player, but being the best side person that I could. So
Oh,
a
sure.
lot of the time that I spent sort of skill building, practicing, working on things, was to be the best sort of uh, side guy that I could be. Um, so I'm like really good at learning songs. I'm really good at recreating sounds. I'm like those are things that I really valued when I was working with other people. And so when it comes to being creative, um, that's I have a fluency musically. And it seems to translate across all the instruments that I play. Like I'm I'm not particularly an incredible keyboard player, but I would say that I'm more comfortable coming up with things on keys than I am necessarily as a writer. And it's
Oh,
and
sure.
it's I'm trying to interact with that, uh and sort of figure out what some of the hang up is. But I think that the reality is that, um I am very confident as an instrumentalist, and so I feel like my ability to tell a story, um through uh, a guitar or a piano or something like that, um, is a lot easier than actually telling you a story. And
Y-
so, the process of that writing and storytelling is very vulnerable. And so I think there's a lot of things that can get in my way, which I think I've heard from people who like my music, that that's a surprise. Um, and I think it's you just assume that every musician, artist, creative, whatever, is just constantly pouring art out of themselves, and that's just not necessarily the case for me. And I know that I actually recently started listening to the Song Exploder podcast. My
okay.
my wife recommended it, and she was like, "I know that this isn't really your thing, but yeah, I think you should check it out." And so I listened to, um, a couple of episodes of that, and I actually found it incredibly inspiring to discover that some of these artists that I just think, like Leanne LaHavis, who I really adore her music and her guitar playing and all of that stuff, and to hear her kind of like, oh, this is how I put this song together, and just be like, oh wow, that's how I put a song together. So if that's how Leanne LaHavis puts a song together, then and that's how I put a song together, then I must be doing okay. And I found it was really to kind of listen through the process of a lot of artists that I admire. It was freeing in a way, and I think I realized, like, and like, we're talking like this happened this weekend. Like I started listening to
Wow.
this podcast on the airplane to the Junos, and I kind of was like, after touring for a year, sort of telling that story on stage and talking about how I kind of hate songwriting.
Right.
uh, I've sort of had this discovery that, it's not that I hate songwriting, it's just that I'm a little afraid of it. And I think that's a very human thing, is to, uh, not know what to do with the things that you're afraid of. And so, I'm starting to like try to reframe that narrative. So all that to say, the songwriting process for me is definitely a struggle, and I have I've always kind of struggled with output.
Yeah.
Like, uh, anybody who knows my band and knows our catalog, the first song that I ever finished from top to bottom, like, here finally I've written, you know, two verses, a chorus, and a bridge, was a song called "Our Love," which is the opening track off our first record. It
Yeah.
took me 7 years to finish that.
I'm so
And
glad I
it's
can relate to something because I can't relate to your guitar playing, but I can at least relate to the songwriting struggle because that's so hard for me too. And do you get a point where you start to come up with something? And we've all got internal critic, and and I don't want to like mention specifically internal critic because we've all got that. But like, there's actually a point where like I rarely can get past this threshold to where I just get so frustrated not being able to get the thing I want to sound like I want, or the right lyric or the right melody line. And it's just like I like start to get angry. Like I get so frustrated, I'm almost angry, and I'm like, I gotta walk away from this. I can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, yeah, you should interact with that.
I should. I should use that as fuel. To be honest, that should be energy to go into it. But
But
songwriting
I mean,
is yeah.
it's such a personal, it's such an intimate and personal thing to do, and I think like you probably experience the same thing that I do. Whereas like if somebody says, "Hey Philip, like take a solo," you're like, "Okay."
Yep.
But if somebody's like, "Hey Philip, tell me a story about the intimate details of your life," like it's normal for you to be like, give me a second, maybe.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what songwriting is. Even if you're trying to tell someone else's story, you can only share a story through your own experience, even if you're telling someone else's. You know, your ability to sorry, I got notifications going off here.
Oh, you're
Shut
fine.
up. Um so it's I think it's very natural uh to have those kind of reactions. And I get the same. Like I mean, I'm not throwing guitars across the room, but I'll definitely get to a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm now damaging the process.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything good. And I think like I've heard people say you got to push through that. You got to push, you got to push, you got to push. And like I while I get how that works for
Hmm.
some people, and I don't uh, I do not doubt the validity of that process. That doesn't work for me,
Yeah.
you know. And maybe I'm a bit stubborn, and you know, there's a there's a fun little saying that goes through our family with in relationship to myself, my brother, and my dad. And it's nobody tells a Landreth what to do. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a good quality, but
Right.
you know, when somebody comes in and goes, "I really think you should do this," my first reaction is to go, "Well, I really think that you should go and yourself," you know.
Kick rocks.
And yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to that, like pushing, it just doesn't work. And it's not for me. For me, songwriting and guitar playing and recording and everything, it's a very delicate environment that needs to be fostered with care and gentleness for me. And so I really think like if I start to get to that point where I'm like I'm really frustrated with this, I need to walk away. I
Yeah.
need to do something else. And I think that that's not a narrative that we often support with artists, because there's always this like you have to push, you have to work, you have to tour, you have to give music absolutely every single inch of who you are. I just think that's super unhealthy, you know.
Yeah.
And I like I'm I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been in recovery for 8 years. I've struggled um with my mental health. I've struggled with addiction. I've struggled with you name it. And I think it's because we push artists to the brink, and we think that that's where creativity lives. And I don't think that creativity doesn't live there, but I really do wholeheartedly believe that it doesn't have to exclusively live there. And if we, you know, if we allow there to be nuances in how we make art, I I strongly believe that people like Hendrix, Janis Joplin, all these people would still be here, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
That's a good point.
and I mean, I know that that we've wandered pretty far away from the songwriting topic, but I think it's all part of it, because we just spin this tale of you have to suffer. And you know, the reality is everyone on this planet is already suffering enough. We all struggle with something one way or another. The I think the key to making good art is allowing yourself to be curious and treating yourself with kindness. And you can still be gentle with yourself and write a sad song about how much something hurt, but you don't have to relive it. You don't have to kill yourself in order to do it. I don't mean that literally. I mean in
Yeah.
terms of in work. Um, Maybe a bad choice of words, but you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
I really believe that, and I think like the for me, and what this is why. our most recent record means so much to me is that we just chased our curiosity around. And that's why this record is different than the ones that we've made. And that's why I think, because of the challenges that we had in terms of making it, because it was made during COVID, and we had some pretty strict COVID rules here at the height of the pandemic. So we were only able to gather in groups of 3 or less, and so we
Yeah.
couldn't get a band into the room. So, and I've talked about this um, in other interviews, but we couldn't get a full band into the room, and so we were like, well, how are we going to finish this record? Because we didn't quite have all we started making the record at a time when the restrictions were looser, and so
Sure.
we did gather with the drummer in the room, and we didn't quite get everything that we needed, and so we decided to start again. And by the time we decided to start again, the COVID had kind of sprung up again, and so the restrictions were heavier. And we were like, well, if we can't get a drummer in this room, then we might as well hire someone from abroad. And if we're going to hire somebody from abroad, we should send some emails to our heroes. And so we ended up getting one of our heroes to play on the record. And it was such a different way to make an album. And it would never have worked if we weren't willing to chase curiosity. I would have sabotaged that. If we'd have been forced to make a record that way like 5 years ago, I never would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm wandering pretty far away from the songwriting topic,
No,
but I
you're
do
good.
think that as an umbrella conversation, um, all of that stuff kind of comes to it. So I think, like, for me, it is well and truly like, chase your curiosity. And if you're a guitar player but you find yourself wanting to play a different instrument, don't stop yourself from doing that.
Yeah.
I see a keyboard right behind you,
Yeah.
and
I had to
you
learn in
know,
college, and so for my degree, I had to take a couple of years of piano, and so then I didn't touch one again after I graduated for years, and then I was like, I really like keys, and that's something I don't think you and I have actually had a conversation about, to kind of pivot a little bit in other instruments and creativity. I tell people all the time that if I had it to do all over again, which obviously we don't, that's a really inane conversation route to go down because you can't do it. But I probably would have learned the Hammond organ instead of taking up guitar and just played Hammond and just been a B3 player. Like, that's
hell
what I
yeah,
do. But I know
yeah,
you're really into Hammond organ as well. So
yeah.
we haven't talked about that, but there's something about that instrument that really speaks to me, to the point that I find myself actively looking for a B3. But like I'm trying to build a studio in my on my lot that I have here in the backyard, and
Yeah.
I don't have anywhere to put a B3, so I'm like, I've got to wait, that's got to get done first. I need a space to put it in.
Well,
um
I mean, if you can find yourself an M3,
yeah, I
because
I
that's what
had I had an M3, or was it an M3 or was it an L? I had something. I had either, I think it was an M series. And it just eventually died. And
yeah,
it,
as
it,
they
the,
do.
yeah. And the, to service it would have been the same cost it would have been for me. Well, actually, it was a lot more than for me to just find another working one, because people practically give them away down here. You
Oh
could,
man, I got my M3 off of Kijiji, which is like our sort of Craigslist equivalent, and I found it for $100.
that's what
And
I
then
paid for mine.
and then and when I emailed the guy, he was like, I think he thought that I was heckling, because he was like, listen, it's like $100. If you can't give me $100 for it, then I'm just going to cut it into pieces and part it out. And I was just like, oh no, man, $100 is fine. But then I put $1,100 worth of work into it.
Yeah, yeah.
You
See,
know,
that was the thing with mine. I wasn't in a place to do that with it. I did a lot of work myself. Like the rotor, the tone wheel was actually stuck, and so I spent
right?
like a whole weekend doing nothing but getting that to turn again on its own. And
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's
Oh yeah.
it's a it's a
I
whole
mean, that's
experience.
that's that's a thing when you get into playing Hammond, you also get into servicing Hammond organs. And
Yes.
I have learned more about electronics in the 2 years or 3 years since I bought my M3 than the my entire adult life owning a soldering iron.
Yeah, and when you
But
open up the back of those, if you think opening up an amp is intimidating and the number of
yeah,
wires
look
that
in the
run
back of
places,
a Hammond organ.
oh, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And that's the thing about those old organs, and I hesitate to even say this on the podcast, but I'm not the first. There's people who listen to much more popular podcasts that have talked about this. There's more than $100 worth of tubes in the back of an M3 organ. Like
Oh yeah.
some of people are harvesting those things just for the tubes that are in them now. I think I've got a whole box full of tubes that came out of a couple of organs over the years that are just, I may need them someday. They're vintage. Some of them are, a couple of them were RCAs, a couple of them are Mullards. I'm like, there's good tubes in
Oh yeah.
these old Hammonds that people are just throwing away.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a wild time. But yeah, I like the idea of chasing other instruments. But pivoting back to songwriting just a little bit, because there were some very pointed questions. This is going to be so correct me if I've got information wrong. So when you lived in Toronto, you were in a writers group with people like Donovan Woods and some other folks. Am I correct here?
I wasn't in a writers group, but
Okay.
I did do some writing with Donovan. I'll let you finish asking your question because there's probably there are probably more lines of truth worth speaking to rather than
Yeah.
just
Well,
elaborating on that.
so I had a listener ask this question, and this is why it was new to me. I didn't know about this. Apparently there was a writers group that met weekly. Then they would all meet and bring songs, and whoever didn't bring a song had to pay for breakfast.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
that's a myth. But
Okay,
I
that's a
do.
myth.
It's so. I was a part of a virtual writers group
Okay.
that had people like Liam Duncan, who played keys in the Brothers for a couple of tours. Roman Clark, who played drums in my band for a while.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Dylan McDonald, whose performer's name is Field Guide, who my brother and our manager Stu both managed together, and he's a brilliant songwriter. Another guy by the name of Chris Ulrich, who's a beautiful guitar player and a beautiful songwriter. And the rules behind that were you submit a song every Sunday. I think it was by midnight, or maybe it was Saturday by midnight. I can't remember. And if you don't meet the deadline, then you're out of the writers group for that stretch. And then when
Oh.
it starts over, then yeah. So the whole thing was to try to finish writing a song, like a song a week, essentially. Which of which I only completed one. And
That was gonna be my next question based on our previous conversation.
yeah. Um, but the song that I got out of that was the first single off of my my last solo record, and it was called Forgiveness, and it wound up being a good song for me.
Yeah, no, it's a
Um,
fantastic song.
but yeah, and that did happen while I was living in Toronto, and I did do some writing with Donovan Woods while I was living in Toronto, and I wrote um, "Still Feel Gone" and "Time Served," which were also pretty big songs for me. Uh, Not necessarily commercially, but within sort of my I hate to use this word, but my fan base, like people who like my music like those
Sure.
songs. And so those two songs were written with Don, and I played on a record of his also while I was living there. I think in 16 or 17, and that was a blast and made a lot of friends during that time. But yeah, there's some small truths
Yeah.
in there, but a little bit of telephone is happening. The game
Yeah,
of telephone.
it's always
Yeah.
fun. It's always fun to hear these things and then figure out what was actually going on.
Yeah.
Because so in the songwriting, that I love the idea, and we've talked about this just a little bit. The idea of the forced songwriting. The hey, we're gonna meet on this day at this time, and you bring a song. Everybody do this. I've actually got a book that I need to actually do this and it's more of an exercise. You're not expecting to get the best result out of it. It's just hey, make sure you're flexing this muscle this week is
Yeah.
the thing. It's the consistent, because I know some Nashville songwriters, some folks I went to college with who have found success in the Nashville songwriting scene and as artists on their own. Um, and one of the things that they talk to me about there is that there's always that artistic side of waiting for inspiration to strike. And then they're very much, no. You train yourself to be creative. You just keep
Yeah.
doing it. You keep doing it, and then you eventually just it starts happening because you set time aside to do this thing. And there's a book that I bought trying to break that that barrier that I still haven't done this, but it's a book called The Frustrated Songwriter's Guidebook for the Frustrated Songwriter or something along those lines. I'm looking over at my bookshelf as if I can read it over there without my glasses on. Um, uh, I've misplaced my glasses and my whole world is a
Oh,
blur.
dude, what a
But
nightmare. Yeah, that's
yeah.
awful.
But anyway, they had this exercise where they said take 24 hours and write 20 songs in 24 hours. And you're supposed to do it with other people and then come together and share your songs. And it's not
Right.
whether it's good or not. That's irrelevant. It does
Yeah.
not matter. It's just you wrote 20 songs, and the concept is that within 24 hours to write 20 songs, you don't have time to think about, is this good? Is this derivative? Is this genre? Is this style? Will people like it? You don't have that kind of time. You just have to
Yeah.
write. You just got to
Yeah.
flex that. And I love that concept. And I think Nickel Creek, when they used to be on the road, Sean, Sarah, and Chris had I think it was just on their days off, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was on show days too. That sounds wild to me. But they had this rule where they wrote a song a day and would all come together at the end of the day to play those songs. And
That's insanity.
it is. It's really wild.
Yeah.
And they would do that on tour. And so it's that whole idea of you're not going to get better at it if you don't do it. You can't just wait for you to feel right to do it. Do you
Yeah.
find some of that as well?
I definitely do. And I think like I have um I have extra grace for myself because for me, my creative sort of environment encapsulates like a lot of different mediums. So it's, and I think like if I was doing more career writing, uh, like some of those Nashville writers, like that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm making records, I'm producing, I'm mixing, I build my own pedal boards, I build my brother's pedal boards. Like my creative outlet is vast. And so I really do leave myself a lot of room when it comes to songwriting to go like, there's my wife and I were just talking about this yesterday. And because she's an intensely creative person and she's really, really good at she's so good at a lot of things. But she was like, I think about it like we have buckets,
Mm-hmm.
and these buckets have a certain amount of creative fluid in it.
Yeah.
And if you dedicate 25% to this and 25% to that and 25%, but at the end of the day you only have 25% left. And so, and that's I think for me that's why I'm not a fast writer, because I just am doing a lot of other things, and I also like to do a lot of other things.
Yeah.
I enjoy. So while I definitely agree um with that, you can build that access to your creativity as a skill. I don't disagree, but the reason why that doesn't necessarily work for me as a writer is because I'm also doing so many other different things. And like I love the idea of trying to write while you're on the road, but the reality for us is like we are Dave and I are driving the van, we're tour managing, we're doing merch, and so uh, I'm sure if we had a driver and a tour manager, there'd be a lot more hours in the day to sit
Yeah.
around and write songs. But that's, and it's not like a woe is me thing. Like we certainly could um, find a way to bring a TM and on the road, but Dave and I are just too frugal, and we like the work. That's the other thing, is we really enjoy the work. So and at the end of the day too, we're traveling with a group of people who travel really well. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know why I'm talking about this. I'm getting sidetracked, but all that to say is that I think my main point is that it certainly is circumstantial. And what I find to be maybe sometimes damaging about those kind of ideas is that they are discounting the human factor, which
Sure.
is, all of those ideas in a vacuum are brilliant and they
Mm-hmm.
work. But as soon as you start to apply the filter of life, and for me, yeah, I'm a session player. I'm a producer. Uh, I hesitate to call myself a mixing engineer, but I have mixed things. Um, and I'm also a dad, and I'm also
Yeah.
a husband. I'm a brother, and I'm a son, and I really, really value those things. Um, in a way that in my past I didn't,
Yeah.
and uh, and I'll never go back to valuing work more than more than time with my family. I'll never do that again. Um, and so I think that you take all of these ideas and you take them with a grain of salt and you figure out a way. You know, I do love the idea of having some kind of goal in terms of writing in order to build that as a skill. I think that's a good idea. But I think the other thing that's really important about what you mentioned, it's like forcing yourself to write 20 songs in 24 hours. It what it does is it removes you from the idea that something has to be objectively good. And I think that there's something really valuable in that in terms of
Yeah.
creativity, because as creators, we also are wrapped up in the idea that absolutely everything we have to make has to be something of incredible integrity and value. And I
Yeah.
think the only, like, you know, people will go, I haven't written any good songs. It's like, yeah, but you've written songs, so you're a songwriter.
That's it.
You know, nobody is saying, are you a singer and good songwriter? No, people just say you're a singer-songwriter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, I've written so many garbage songs that will never ever see the light of day, and the thought of people hearing them terrifies me.
Yep.
Uh, but I think that the if your goal is to make something, then that's all you have to do is make something. And like for me, what I'm really excited to, after sort of getting inspired by the Song Exploder podcast, is to just get into the studio and just make stuff.
Yeah.
Like pick up my guitar and play something and build off of it, and not be tied to the idea that it has to turn into a song that's going to go on a record, but just make stuff. And that's ultimately what I really love to do the most, and what I love about making records and all that stuff is just playing in the sandbox. Like my studio is called Sandbox Recording, because we're just a couple kids playing in the sandbox. So I don't know. I do love this conversation, because I think it's really important to talk about, like, what the definition of creativity is,
Yeah.
and try to divorce it from having to create something objectively good. You know, if you and it might sound like you know, people are always belly aching about, like, giving away, like, thanks for participating awards, but it is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like, when it comes to creativity, uh the only metric is that you need to measure is, did I make something?
Yeah.
It's, you know, and that's what I'm always telling people who are like, give me some advice. Like, just don't worry about it being good, just make something and keep making things, and recycle your old ideas, steal from yourself constantly, plagiarize yourself. Who gives a shit if you've used a line in a song already? Use it again if it works better. Like, I'm not precious about any of that
Yeah.
stuff. And I think that, like, what I like about sort of what you described in terms of, like, some songwriter exercises, are just the push to just open up your mind to just making stuff, and not being precious about it. And I lost my train of thought. I can't remember what I was going to say in
Oh,
response to that.
no, it's
But
fine. But it's the same vein of, and you see memes and you see images and inspirational quotes on social media about things like being good at something is not a prerequisite to enjoying doing it, or if you do something, you are that thing. I really had that hit me a few years ago. A few years ago, I ran my first marathon, which those of you that have seen me, you know that I'm not built for running. That's not who I am. It's fine. But I actually enjoyed. I have not really done a lot since I got COVID last year, and the lungs have really not appreciated it, but I'm working back up to it.
yeah,
I've run a couple of marathons, but my first one was rough. My first one was very rough, and I had a couple of really inspirational moments on that. I don't want to turn this into man tackles physical feat, comes out the other end, a different person. But I had a couple of things where I had trained for that run. I was ready. I was like prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was my shoes rubbing me wrong that day, and I ended up with giant blisters on the bottom of both of my feet around mile
Oh,
14. And
yeah.
so mile 14, for those of you that don't want to do the math, that means I've still got 12 miles to go on blisters. And so it started to get painful. And I had a guy, well, I'll tell the really inspirational story, the one that made me finish, because I was real close to just calling, medical and just quitting, like being done. And I was running next to this, walking, and this woman walks up next to me, dressed as Superwoman. I should mention, people dress up for marathons. She walks up next to me and starts telling me, we just start chatting around mile 17. And she tells me this story because I'm running the St. Jude Marathon in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a charity that I really support, Children's Hospital. They do a lot in cancer research in children. And so she tells me the story of how she was living in Texas, was a single mom, and her child was diagnosed with this extremely rare, extremely aggressive cancer. And they came to St. Jude. Her son got into, and this is a little dark, and I'm sorry, y'all, but got into an experimental treatment where they were still trying to figure out if it worked. So obviously they're doing focus groups, and you have to do things where half them get the medicine, half don't, to see if the treatment actually works. Half get a placebo, and her son was in the half that got it, and he lived. And she was telling me this story because she was talking about how the next year, this was in 2017, I ran this one, 2017. And so she told me that, for 2018, her son was turning 18 and going to run the St. Jude with her the next year. And
Cool.
I was like, okay, I can get through this. If she got through that and they got through that, I can get through
Yeah.
this. But
Yeah.
to bring it around to the other point, just because that was the real life-changing moment of that one. But at one point I was stopped because my feet were hurting. I was took my shoes off, readjust my socks, trying to figure out a way to continue even to walk this out, right? And a guy running stopped to check on me, and he said, "Are you okay, marathoner?" And I was like, "Yep, just got some blisters. I'll be all right." He said, "All right, see you at the finish line." But just that
Cool.
moment, and he'll never know that he was the person who did this, but he called me a marathoner.
Yeah.
I am sitting on the side of the road with my trying to get my shoes readjusted to try to painfully walk through this. And he called me a marathoner. It didn't matter if I finished that thing in 3 hours or 8 hours.
10. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I finished a marathon. And
Yeah.
it's creating something makes you a creator. Create things. They don't have to be good.
Yeah, man. There's so much in there, dude. Like I think that one like one of the problems I really feel is and you know certainly not trying at all to make it political in any way, but is like the commercialization of music, of art. And it's necessary. I
Yeah.
make my living off of art. um I would be a gigantic hypocrite if I was like, you know, I stop making money like that. And that's not what I'm saying. But being able to divorce yourself from the idea of the value of what you're making can only be determined by if it has commercial success.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that speaks to my career as an artist, because like I can't tell you how often people say, "I wish you guys were more successful," and I say thank you, because I think they mean well, but it's like, but you have no idea what I thought I was going to be doing with my music, and the things that I get to do for a
Mhm.
living, I am are beyond my wildest dreams. I never, ever, ever would have thought that the things that have happened to me in my music career have happened to me. And so when somebody says, "I wish you were more successful," I'm just like, man, you have no idea how successful I am. And I don't make a lot of money. I
Yeah.
make way more than I ever thought I was going to make, but I don't objectively make a lot of money at all.
But
I'm still very much in the bottom of the middle class sort of uh lifestyle, but it's more than I ever thought. And so I feel, even though uh, objectively I'm not a wealthy person, I feel wealthy because I make more than I ever thought I would. anyway, I don't know. I think like we yeah, and it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do because you obviously want commercial success.
You're right.
You want your music to do well. I was recently talking to a young guitar player who's having a moment, and he was like, a lot of people are pushing me to go on the road, and I don't really want to go on the road because I got this woman at home that I'm madly in love with, and this life that I'm living that I really love, and going on tour is going to change that in some way. It's not
Yeah, yeah.
necessarily going to make all those things go away, but it's going to change it. What do you think? Like, should I just tough it out? And I was like, you know what? You don't have to make your living 100% from the songs that you make or the gigs that you play in order to be a musician of great value and integrity. All you have to do is literally keep doing what you're doing right
Yeah,
now,
that's it.
you know, and you don't even have to keep doing it in the way that you're doing it, you know. And that's something that I wish I would have understood when I was younger, because that's the kind of balance that I was talking about earlier. Um, I sacrificed a lot for my career, uh, and my brother sacrificed a lot for his career. And although we wouldn't be where we are right now, without some of the tough stuff that we did, I don't necessarily know that I don't always feel like it was worth it, you know.
Yeah,
And again, I'm not disappointed with where I'm at. I'm so thrilled with where we are,
sure.
and I don't think that I would necessarily change it. But if I'd have realized that there was another way to do it, you know. And I think that that's my goal, like sharing pieces of my story with people, is that I just want you to think about like what you actually want, you know, because like going on tour and playing shows for people is awesome.
Yeah,
But like when you go on tour, and especially if you tour the way that I tour, um, you're not like going to Paris and walking through museums and looking at fine art.
yeah,
Like you're staying in garbage smelly hotels, driving yourself around in a van that you probably rented in England. So you're driving on the opposite side of the car, on the opposite side of the road that car was meant to drive on. You're humping your own gear. You're counting your own t-shirts. Don't get me wrong. I love all that stuff, but it's like after 10 years of doing it, it's not necessarily as cool.
no,
You know what I mean?
and it's not, the fun wears off. The novelty of it wears off.
It certainly does. I mean, the novelty of playing shows for people with like playing shows for people who love your music and making it with people that you love, that never wears off.
Right.
That's always going to be special. Um, but it's easy to romanticize that stuff. And I mean, it's why so many touring musicians struggle with addiction,
Yeah.
because it's not an easy life to live, and it's easy to want to hide your pain, because also you don't want to tell people that like, hey, I'm living my dream, but it sucks,
Yeah.
you know, and nobody wants to hear that. But the reality is that it's also simultaneously super awesome, but it's also just it's a hard way to live your life. I'm not asking people to feel sorry for us. This is the life that we've chosen, and
Yeah.
I'm 100% responsible for it. But I just wish that more people were talking about the all of the all of the reality of it. And like I think like, you know, no matter how good a show is and how good a tour is, nothing is better than waking up and walking my daughter to daycare and talking to her about the day she's going to have. Nothing will ever beat that. And so I'm willing to sacrifice some time with her in order to maintain our quality of life. But only as much as necessary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. I just like, um, uh, I don't know why I'm talking about all that. I lost my train of thought
No,
again,
it's fine.
but
It's a good conversation, and it actually ties in. So last week I had Meredith Coloma of Coloma Guitars, another Canadian. She's over in Vancouver. Um,
very good.
she and I had this same conversation about knowing what your goal actually is, and knowing what attaining it looks like. Like some people just want to be famous, and that was where our conversation was. Some people just want to be famous, but they don't really
Yeah.
understand what being famous means. Like they want the glitz of, and they don't want the grittier backside of it. And I really appreciate how openly you and David talk about this. I think you did it on the recent Karate in the Garage, which is a YouTube series that y'all did. Y'all brought it back. So hopefully when y'all find, those extra 4 hours that we keep begging for in the day, y'all can keep that going.
Yeah.
But you talked about how important, like, y'all could, you could go on the road, do these massive 6, 9, 12-month tours, build the fan base even more, but you're not willing to spend that time away from your family. You're not willing to interrupt the life you've got. So you do shorter runs, and that means balancing a work-life balance, air quotes,
Yeah.
that whole thing. But it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. And like, I think you touched on something because, well, I mean, just this morning I had to drive up to FedEx to pick up a package, and after sort of my transaction was finished, the clerk behind the counter went, "Are you in the Brothers Landreth?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I am." She's like, "I love your band." It's like, "Thank you so much. That's really a nice thing to hear." We do have this sort of like sort of small, especially in Winnipeg, people are very, very, very proud of us here, which is a beautiful thing. So we have this little corner of fame, um,
Sure.
but that was never the goal. And it's not like I don't wake up in the morning, I'm like, frig, I hope the person at the coffee shop knows who I am. And to be completely honest, I'm a pretty introverted guy, and
Yeah.
I as much as it's hilarious that I'm like, I'm a performer and a frontman for a living, I'm pretty awkward and pretty shy. And so, I definitely struggle with that side of what we do. Um, but if your goal is to be famous, that is a never-ending hunger,
Yeah.
and you will never feed that beast. Like, it will consume you, and it's not a good life. And I've worked for people that were just like, I don't care what kind of music I make, I just want to be famous. So I'll sing a country song, and then put me into the room with a pop producer, I'll sing a pop song. I don't care what the song is about, I just want to be famous. And that's a dangerous place like, if
Yeah.
if you if you pursue your art with all your heart and you wind up famous, like, probably most people who are in that situation are like, feel the same way that I do about my little sliver of sort of fame. I hate saying that, but um, they probably it's like, having somebody tell you that they love your music is a beautiful thing, but
Mhm.
like, but having somebody be uncomfortable to talk to you, or that sucks, because I just want somebody to realize that we're just normal guys, like, I drive a 1997 Toyota Corolla, like, I'm
Yeah.
not right. I don't have a multi-car garage. I don't even have a garage. I just have a parking pad. Like, so that stuff I definitely struggle with. But if your goal is, and this is what I wanted to say before when I
Yeah.
lost my train of thought. Um, what drives me to continue doing what I do in the times that are hard are the pursuit of beauty in some way. I like to make music that makes me feel, not outwardly, but makes me feel beautiful. Like, I like to make a beautiful sound. I like to watch my peers do beautiful stuff. I don't know. And I don't mean like everything has to be a luscious string arrangement. Like, beautiful can be an octafuzz into a tube screamer, but it's like the pursuit of making something that makes you feel great.
Yeah.
That to me, you will feel successful if that's your goal every time you do it. And like that, and we've probably talked about this a little, like, but when you come to your guitar with that intention, you will always play something great. If you walk up to the microphone at a show with the intention to just make yourself feel good, guess what? Your audience is going to feel it, and they're going to have a great time. If you walk up there going like, I've got this line of licks that I just want to play so I can impress everybody, and then they're going to walk away saying, wow, that might be the best guitar player I've ever seen. That's not going to happen.
No.
You're not going to connect, because the thing that, and we've all experienced it, the thing that we connect with when we hear somebody do something incredible is their humanity. It's not necessarily their skill. When I hear somebody shred on the guitar, I don't necessarily connect with it unless it's coming from that place of like, you know, when Stevie Ray Vaughan plays like a blistering line of notes, I'm not impressed by the skill of it. I'm impressed by the emotional output. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if that's your goal, and as a songwriter, your goal is to share your story, then you're already successful, you know, and that's what art exists for. And I think that if you pursue that and you stay the course on that, then you will find some kind of success in the more traditional sense. You know, if you keep at it and you keep just trying to share your story, share your personality, tell people what you're all about, you'll find an audience, because that's what I think, you know, success for me is just finding like-minded people who feel the same way about the music that feel the same way about music that I feel. And that's, I don't know, I'm blabbing again.
No, it's fine. It makes for good podcasting. And actually, so I have so many more things I want to talk about. Things like you talked about string arrangements and lush arrangements and stuff like that. And actually, I want to talk about how you do that with guitar, and actually talk about guitar on a guitar podcast. But we're actually we're running up on time. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take this moment to thank my Patreon supporters. And then we're going to go over to the Patreon episode. Listeners, I know, I'm sorry. We're going to actually talk about guitar on the bonus content episode. I know. I'm sorry. But we get to talking, and we have lots of things we want to talk about. The last time I saw Joey in person, he was playing in Nashville out at the City Winery. He came out, and we talked outside. And, like, at some point, we had to be like, hey, you need to go. Because it's like we're having a great conversation, but it's getting late, and like the guys are tearing down gear and forcing you to get up and go do the thing.
I can only let the band tear down my stuff so many times before I start getting rocks put on my pillow.
Yeah, exactly. So Patreon supporters, thank you for all your support. Gonna call you out all by name: Duncan Watson, Andy Johns, David Evangelista of the Guitar Dads podcast, Josh Gierkin, Blake Jefferson, Nick Call, Andrew Hensley, Alan Gresham, Dan Pilver of Lewitt Microphones, Scott Hamilton of the Effects Loop podcast, Andy Koenig, Jim Burns, Tom Kelly, Heath Batt, Ben Fair of Electromotive Sound Pedals, Rick Calhoun of Honey Picks, Jeffrey Wachs, and Kyle Harris. Thank you for your support. You literally keep this show going. I can't do it without y'all. So, Joey, where can everybody find you? Anything before we sign? Actually, I do have one last thing. This is going to be it. And then we're going to say where they can find you. Of course, it's all in the links below. If you click below, because I'm going to, there's going to be so many links, y'all. Just go down and click the links.
Link City.
So I added this segment in the last few episodes, and I'm actually pretty sure I stole this from Zach Broyles of Mythos Pedals on his podcast. Because I came up with it on spur of the moment during a podcast, and then I realized I stole it. Well, I'm going to live with it now. So on a gear note, is there anything right now that you're like, I need to get one of those? What are you gassing for? Like, what do you want that you don't have?
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? It's not that I don't have it. I'm looking for somebody who has made a Maxon SD9 with more bottom end.
Okay.
Yeah, I have, like, because I'm a big Mike Landau fan, and I went out and picked myself in on a spur of the moment thing. I picked up an Analog Man modded SD9, and I loved it. I used it. It was my main drive sound all last year for tour. But then you just lose so much bottom, and it's funny because like when I read like forums, people talking about, because I'm constantly like Googling to see if somebody's made one. Yeah. They're like, oh, the bottom end just thumps, and I'm like, man, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like, I just lose all bottom end. Anyway, so if somebody knows where to find one, The Analog Modern one is really, really great. Analog Man Modern one is really great. But I'm looking for something that just has a little more booty.
All right. Well, that's awesome. With that, we will wrap up this episode. Go over to Patreon. Y'all, thank you for support. Thank you for listening. Click the links below to find the Bros Landreth on all the things. Patreon, YouTube, Spotify. I'll leave a Spotify link down there, but I'll leave a link to the website. And do y'all still use Bandcamp? You still got stuff up on Bandcamp?
We do. Yeah,
Okay.
we do. Bandcamp
Awesome.
is great.
I'll add a link to that as well because Bandcamp pays better. Y'all support your artists.
They do.
In the meantime, though, as always, be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.